Da-da-da. It says preparing, but we're probably live.
Hey, everybody.
It's 7 o'clock, and it's a little hard to tell totally if we're live, but we assume that we are live. Good evening, friends out there in internet world. Good to see you. Glad that you are joining us tonight for Life in Lockdown number 2, the sequel. So glad that you are with us. Jordan, welcome.
Good to be here. How are you?
Good to have you. I have my Cross Covenant Chinese Church mug tonight.
Very nice.
Very nice. Very nice. A little
Just got some water here.
Got a little decaf tea. African Autumn is what I'm drinking tonight.
Ooh. You always keep the tea selections exciting.
I like to keep it interesting. I got to be honest. I get a little tired of the same old thing. So to you and your water.
Cheers.
Cheers. Excellent.
It's creatine free.
I don't see any beet coloring in there either.
No beet juice either.
Good choice. Good choice. So. Hey everybody, we're glad you're here. I got a couple of housekeeping items before we actually start any kind of content. The first is, as you watch tonight, feel free to send in any questions. If you were with us last time, you know how this works. If you didn't do this before, on the right side of the screen there, you'll be able to see questions people are writing and interacting with. If you would send in questions in the first 15 minutes or so of our time, Aaron Martinson is going to collect those and email them to us, and we will try to answer some of those at the end. You can ask broad questions about church stuff. You can ask personal questions. We reserve the right to ignore them if we want to. And you can also ask questions about our topic tonight, which is eschatology. So we'll come back and explain what that is and why we're talking about it in a minute. Secondly, while you're here on this YouTube channel, you can subscribe to our Cross Park YouTube channel so that you receive updates whenever we post updates. Subscribe below. Thank you. Yes, we know that I'm not the most technically astute fellow. So below somewhere, there's a button apparently that probably says subscribe that would allow you to receive regular updates. And finally, feel free while you are in lockdown to take pictures, videos, as you naturally post some of those things to social media, stuff you're doing with your family maybe. If you want to tag those to Cross Park Church, we will take some of those and highlight them each week. By we, I mean Aaron Martinson, not me and probably not Jordan. Yeah, exactly. Hashtag, I don't know what I'm doing on Twitter.
You got that right. Yeah,
hashtag, I don't even have Instagram. So Aaron will look for some of those as you post. If you tag them, link them, whatever to Cross Park, then we will be happy to grab some of those and highlight those each week. So, Jordan, we're going to get started a little bit here. We're going to, as you know, we're going to have some sort of fluffy questions, then some get to know you questions, and then some more serious content.
I like the fluffy.
Fluffy's good.
Yeah.
You don't want to get too fluffy. My first question for you is The Mandalorian, yes or no?
Ooh, yes, absolutely yes.
How far into it are you?
So good. I am through season 1.
Okay, excellent.
Yeah.
I am 5/8 of the way through season 1. Looking forward to hopefully finishing it up this week. And I hear they're making The Making of the Mandalorian that's coming out on May the 4th for Star Wars Day.
Oh, that's incredible.
So be on the lookout for that.
Baby Yoda.
Yes. Do you have, without any spoilers, do you have any strong opinions on Baby Yoda?
I like Baby Yoda, but technical protocol is you're not allowed to, within the society, call him Baby Yoda. It's actually the child.
Yes, because he's not Yoda. I mean, Yoda's already dead. As far as now, I haven't finished the series, so there may be some info I don't have, but yeah. He's not Baby Yoda, but it's hard not to call him that. Honestly, I didn't think I was going to like Baby Yoda, and he's kind of grown on me.
Yeah.
Like a fungus, but still, he's appealing, little character. All right, my next question is, I promised on a whim, I promised a beard update. So you want to lean in for us and show us what you got going on there?
Yeah. I don't have quite as much gray as you, maybe just a few little.
That's nice.
Speckles, yeah.
And am I right in stating you have not trimmed it? I mean, you've been just letting it roll?
Well, this evening right here, getting a little low, got to keep that out of the lip
consomme?
area. Yes. How about you?
Yeah, I'll lean in.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. Lots of salt in that pepper.
Yes. Getting full, little full, a lot of sap. It's grown in nicely. And yeah, this is the longest probably I've had my beard since the middle somewhere of the sabbatical 2 summers ago.
Yes.
Did you go all
Good.
summer growing out your beard on sabbatical?
No, I don't think so entirely, but a lot less shaving.
Yeah, fair enough.
Because, why not?
Why not? I know you got the Jeff Hardy haircut on sabbatical as well.
Yes. Yeah, I really enjoyed that.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about bringing it back.
It's super easy. It's
It
hard
really
to beat.
is.
It's low maintenance, man.
Especially in lockdown.
Especially, I mean, I cut my hair 3 weeks ago and it still is this short. So it's low effort. It's very nice. Okay, one more sort of current day question. You and I both have a variety of hobbies. I don't know how interesting they are to anyone, but tell me one of your hobbies that has gotten more time during the coronavirus lockdown.
That's good. I'm gonna have to go with gardening.
I was guessing that.
Yeah, I've planted quite a few things. I moved the vegetables this year up to the deck because animals, etc., were eating them last year and they weren't doing so well.
So you only have the poison items off the deck? Is that the deal?
Yes. So we got these like boxes that they're planters, containers that they're planted in. So the puppy, who's now 8 months old, Dolly, dug one out entirely. Like I filled the whole thing with soil. It's probably like 3 feet by 1 foot. Dug the whole thing out. Did not go well for her. And then the very next day, she did it again. So.
How did you respond to that? I'm curious.
Yeah, I might want to talk to you about that offline.
And as you can guess, this is reason number 472 why I don't have a pet.
There it is. Yeah, the goldfish was pretty appealing after that happened. But,
doesn't that sound good?
Yeah. So what are you doing besides, I'm guessing, making more bread? Then maybe that is your answer.
Well, that is my answer. As you guys know, I like bread. So my dad used to joke. So in the mid 80s, I got a jeans jacket, right? Stonewashed, the whole thing, because that was cool at the time. And my dad was like, hey, I was jeans jacket before jeans jacket was cool. And I'm like, well, yeah, like an old dark dungaree jacket that you wore in the 60s and now don't wear in the 80s. So I'm not sure how that gets you anywhere. I was sourdough before sourdough was cool.
Wow.
And, so I've been making stuff for a while. And I had been on a bit of a bread hiatus over the last 6 months or so. And so I have totally amped it up. New hamburger buns. I've been making calzone dough. That's been nice. Wow. A new rye whole wheat sourdough loaf that is really, really nice. That might be my favorite. Or I've been making my own tortillas.
Ooh.
And, it's just flour, salt, baking powder, and some kind of fat. So, butter, Crisco, oil, whatever. But I've been using a combination of butter and bacon fat.
Oh, wow. That's next level.
It is next level. It's delicious. Wow.
Yeah.
So bacon fat tortillas.
That's amazing. What's the family favorite out of that host of menu items?
I think probably the bacon fat tortillas have been quite popular.
Really?
Yeah, we eat a decent amount of, Tex-Mexy kind of stuff. And I haven't made them every time. But you see, with bread, right, the deal is there's a lot of waiting around with bread. But you have to, you do one step, you let it proof, you come back an hour and a half later. Mm-hmm. Hard to do, right, if you're out at work. If you're working mostly from home, it's much easier, right? It doesn't take a lot of time, but you just have to be nearby to mess with the next step. So it's been easy to amp up. It's kind of like your vegetables. They're nearby if you need to tend them or throw one of them at a child or at a pet.
That's exactly right.
So here's what I want to do next. So, we try to be authentic and vulnerable in our teaching and preaching, hopefully. And so people have gotten to know us. And of course, we're both nice young men and try to get to know the people of our church, but they may not know some of our childhood stories. So I'm not asking you to tell your life story or anything, but I do have
Wow.
some childhood questions to let everybody get to know us a little better. What were your favorite cartoons as a kid? So I'm thinking
Mm.
anything high school or younger, right? So you can answer
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
anywhere in there.
Yeah, because I watched a lot of cartoons in high school. No, I'm kidding. He-Man, that
Okay.
was kind of like that's the top of the list for me.
Yes.
He-Man was a big one. G.I. Joe,
I also watched a lot of G.I. Joe.
and then Gummy Bears.
I liked the Gummy Bears flying
Yeah,
here and there and everywhere.
and
We are the
everywhere.
Gummy Bears.
That's exactly right.
I liked watching and eating Gummy Bears. So,
So how's your list differ from that?
I almost put Gummy Bears on there. G.I. Joe was on the list. I'm a little older than you, so I used to watch Super Friends, which was like Justice League kind of thing.
Ah.
It sounds a lot cooler when you call it the Justice League. Super Friends.
Yeah,
Not
I was
cool.
about to say, I was like, wow, is that like a Care Bears kind of? Super Friends.
I did not watch the Care Bears, and I like the Smurfs a lot.
Yes, you know what? I like the Smurfs too.
Trivia question: do you know Gargamel's cat, Azrael? Do you know who Azrael's named after?
Wow, you should two live lockdowns in a row, and you've stumped me. No.
The supposed angel of death.
Wow.
I mean, there's no name in the Bible, right? But whatever the mythical lore is that the angel of death is named Azrael, and that's Gargamel's cat.
Wow.
Okay,
we watched the Angel of Music the other night.
The Angel of Music?
Phantom of the Opera.
Nice. Okay, so did you read comic books at all as a kid, and what were your favorites?
Not a lot. I would every now and then in the grocery store grab the Mad magazine.
Yeah, sure.
Over time, those kind of went downhill content-wise.
Or maybe you outgrew them.
Or maybe so, but this, I don't know if this really counts as comic books. It doesn't, but Calvin and Hobbes. I was a big Calvin and Hobbes fan.
That's the best. Calvin and Hobbes is the best. I had a subscription. Yeah. I had a subscription to the G.I. Joe comic book.
Ooh.
For years. And early on, you had to go to the comic book store every month to pick it up.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, it was great. So I had a subscription through them. It was awesome. And then eventually they sent it to my house, you know. I mean, I think the mail worked back when I was younger. I don't know why I had to go.
But you probably loved it so much more and then you had to go pick it up.
It was great. It was great. Used to go to Valley Hills Mall in Hickory to the comic book store and pick up my monthly G.I. Joe comic book.
That's impressive.
I don't know if I have them or if my parents have them. Mom, you can tell me if you have them. I can't remember. I think my parents are probably watching. But yeah, I think I still have them. I don't know if they're worth anything. But okay, another childhood question. What were your favorite action figures?
Again, G.I. Joe.
Obviously.
Again, He-Man. And, you know, I think Lego started to make it big when I was a kid. So nice. I wonder if that's on your list.
You know, it wasn't. I liked Lego, but Star Wars action figures were huge as I was a kid. Again, I'm a little older, so they were a big deal. And then do you remember the starting lineup action figures? They were like actual football, basketball, baseball players. Now, see, I was already playing sports with my Star Wars and G.I. Joe figures. So it was great to have actual action figures who were supposed to play a sport.
That's impressive.
Yeah, we thought those were pretty great. They were awesome. Favorite TV shows as a kid?
Growing Pains. Featured
obviously
recently in an update video.
I noticed that.
Did you notice that?
I did. Show me that smile.
I love that intro. What's the name of it? Who's the Boss?
Oh yeah.
I was a big fan of Who's the Boss.
Tony Danza.
Saved by the Bell.
Were they on the same night? Who's the Boss and
they were back to back.
ABC, maybe?
Yeah, I don't know. Saved by the Bell. Really wanted to be Zach Morris. That was my, you know.
I can see you having a bit of a Zach Morris streak about you.
Yeah, just a little, you know.
Okay, so again, showing my age.
Let's hear it.
Family Ties. I was a big fan of Family Ties. Really liked Alex P.
Michael Keaton.
Yeah. Alex P. Keaton.
Excuse me. I'm
Michael
blending
J. Fox. Alex P. Keaton.
There I go again.
There, you Sam Smith, Sam Storms, whatever.
Sam Storms.
It's all the same.
I did it again in the sermon this past Sunday.
Did you?
Augie Pullman, not Augie Tillman.
Oh, yikes.
Wow.
So Family Ties. I put Cosby in there. It feels kind of stale and obvious, but that was a great show when it first came out.
Yeah.
And then the Wonder Years.
Yes.
So
good.
Kevin Arnold in the story, like as they went through it, he was basically my age. Like he was like a grade behind me or something in from my real life. So I really, really identified with and connected with the whole thing. And I remember like totally, honestly, I mean, I think I was 18 at this point. The finale, do you remember the finale?
Yep.
I go to pick up Winnie at the airport with my wife, and I'm like, he doesn't marry Winnie? I may have cried. I'm not sure.
Yes. Oh man, that was the best series. I liked it. I kind of underappreciated it as a kid, and we watched it when we had one of our kids, like when they were a baby, and we were like binge watching something. We watched the whole series in a very short amount of time. So good.
So my only question about that is, when you binged watched it, did they have the original music or not? Because I know they had a copyright issue where they couldn't get the rights. It changed. Yeah. Okay.
It changed from one season to the next, if I remember.
Huh. Fascinating.
So
okay. So now you mentioned that show was underrated in your mind.
Yes.
And obviously, if it was not rated at the top, it was underrated in my mind. Give the people a movie or two that you really like that you're guessing people don't know about. Like it's underrated, you love it, but probably not a lot of people have seen it.
I seriously, I cannot come up with much.
Okay.
So I don't think Rudy counts.
Yeah, probably not. I'm not surprised that you said Rudy though.
After that, I've got some animated movies. Up
is a great movie,
but it's probably not underrated.
Yeah, probably not. It's probably properly rated.
October Sky, that one just came to mind. I really liked October Sky.
I never saw that.
That's a good one.
Was that the one about the rocket?
The Rocket Boy.
Yeah, Rocket Boy. Fantastic. Okay, so a couple movies I've seen that I think are always underrated. Did you ever see Stranger Than Fiction with Will Ferrell?
Nope.
Okay. It is the best secular exploration of the idea of providence that you're ever going to see. It's a funny movie. I think it's relatively clean. I don't remember. It's been a long time since I've seen it. It's a delightful movie. It's a comedy, but it's quirky. It's not like a lot of other Will Ferrell movies. So that's a great one, Stranger Than Fiction. And then recently I watched The Professor and the Madman. The title of the movie was A Story of Murder, Insanity, and the Making of the Oxford English Dictionary.
Wow.
And it's starring Mel Gibson and Sean Penn. And I thought, I'm not sure who the madman is between those two, but I need to watch the movie. And honestly, it's a true story. It's fascinating. I went and actually, Trish got the book after I watched the movie. It was so good. I wanted to kind of get the full story. So read the book. So yeah, Professor and the Madman, definitely underrated, worth watching, I would say.
Wow. Is it a recent movie then?
Relatively, yeah. I think last 5 years or so.
All right.
Okay, so we're going to go slightly more serious here, but still not our major content.
Yeah.
So looking for nonfiction books that have had an influence and impact in your life, and then fiction. So let's both do a few nonfiction books, probably Christian books, that have had a major influence on you, and then we'll do a few fiction ones.
Okay. Man, I got a long list here. So I'm going to go earlier life.
Great.
Yeah. Grace Unknown by R.C. Sproul. Probably the reason I'm reformed.
Okay.
Knowing God, J.I. Packer.
Excellent.
Don't Waste Your Life by John Piper.
Mm-hmm.
Came to seminary after the 5th time reading it. Slow learner. Seminary and After, Christ of the Covenants by O. Palmer Robertson.
Yes.
The Holy Spirit by Sinclair Ferguson. I had to get
I knew you had to get it in there.
And then John G. Patton, or Peyton, some say, autobiography, which you gave me.
Yes.
Really influenced me.
That's a great book.
And then more recently, I know this is going to be on your list because you also gave it to me. The Contemplative Pastor.
Yes.
Eugene Peterson.
So good.
Union with Christ by Rankin Wilbourne.
Mm-hmm.
And Insourcing by Randy Pope.
Okay.
kind of the discipleship movement stuff, which has
Yes.
really influenced me over the last year.
Yeah, great. Okay, so for me, one of the early Christian books that really influenced me was Future Grace by John Piper.
Mm,
So I don't even know what the name of his bigger book was. Was it Desiring God?
yeah,
Yeah, I never read that.
no kidding.
Yeah, but I read, so on a summer project, I was helping lead a summer project in Slovakia, and I read Future Grace. And I mean, most authors, right? Their main stories, their main themes are their main themes in every book. So
Yeah.
Piper was doing his classic Piper stuff. God is most, glorified in you when you're most satisfied in Him, and it just blew me away. And it kind of like your R.C. Sproul book a bit, probably turned my heart to theological things and to historical reform thinking on the gospel and how we're saved and what God is like. And that was a
Mm.
major influence in my life. Let's see, what else did I put down on my list?
It's amazing. I wonder how long the list is of pastors that Piper and Sproul have influenced. It's pretty-
Yes. We're going with the readers again here, so I can actually see my list. Communion with God by John Owen.
yeah.
So it's a little dense, and I've read, there's a couple different versions of it out there. It's honestly, right, when you read the Puritans, which sound stuffy, but they're not. The Puritans are some of the best examples of caring deeply about what the Bible says, theology, and caring deeply about having affection for God, right? Deeply
Mhm.
loving Him and desiring Him. And so communion with God, yeah, it is a theological book in some ways, but it's deeply devotional. So that book has been very significant for me.
Yeah,
And
and
then,
a great treatment of the whole Trinity too. It's not
yes,
just focusing on one or just referring to God vaguely, but really
yes,
Trinitarian.
it's really beautiful. You mentioned Eugene Peterson. I've loved a lot of Eugene, but yeah, the Contemplative Pastor. I was reading. I read it. I reread sections of that several times a year, typically. And was actually
It's really so
in
good.
my backyard today. Was reading the Apocalyptic Pastor chapter. So I
There
tell,
you go.
I tell interns and pastors, the first 3 chapters of that book, even if you don't read the rest of it, which is all worthwhile, the first 3 chapters of that book really just shift your perspective on what you're supposed to do. What does it mean to be a pastor?
Yeah.
All right, let's go fiction for a second.
All right.
Any fiction books that have in some way or another significantly influenced your life?
So also given to me by you. This is a theme. Peace Like a River.
Oh,
Lee Finger.
man.
So good.
That
So
book,
good.
I mean, so I thought about reading it tonight and I decided not to, but that section, and I don't want to give anything away. If you haven't read Peace Like a River, guys, by Leif Enger, go get it.
Yes.
It is a beautiful and compelling example of what someone who has a Christian imagination, right? Who is influenced by Christian, it's not a Christian book per se, right? But it's a story, it's fiction. But there's a scene, I won't tell the details. There's a scene, right? A picture of heaven at some point in that book that I cannot get through it without weeping because
It's
it's
just
so
incredible.
beautiful. It's incredible. It's like the best kind of imaginative Bible informed speculation, right, about the things that matter in the age to come.
I always want to describe that chapter to people, but you sort of give away too much of the
Yep,
story.
you do.
It's better to just go read it, but it made heaven more real for me.
Yeah, it's
when I
definitely
read it.
better. It's definitely better to go read it.
I feel like these are going to be the kind of typical pastor answers, but the Wing Feather Saga,
Yeah, baby.
Andrew Peterson, Chronicles of Narnia, Lord of the Rings. Chronicles of Narnia was my favorite series growing up as a kid too.
Okay.
And then another book I really enjoyed was Quo Vadis.
Yes, that's
Heinrich
a great book.
Sienkiewicz.
Yes.
Yeah.
You gave me that one. That's an excellent book.
Yeah.
A good Polish. He won the Nobel Prize for that book, right?
That's right. Yeah. I actually pulled the trailer up of that movie. They made it in like 1951, and it was like the most overblown trailer you've ever seen. The greatest movie of all time. But I've never seen the movie. Only read the book.
Yeah, maybe you should see it. Maybe it's good.
Maybe so.
For me, a couple of fiction books I put down. Peace Like a River. I've been fairly heavily influenced by Wendell Berry. And so both Jayber Crow and Hannah Coulter are just excellent works of fiction, novels. Barry he understands people really well. He
Hmm.
understands how people work. And then in the last 2 years or so, I can't remember exactly when I bought it. I'd given the book to people, but I hadn't actually bought it and read it. It's called This Day. It's a collection of Sabbath poems from his whole life.
Yep.
And not every week, but many Sunday afternoons, I will spend time in that book. And we don't understand Sabbath very well, right?
Right.
And I'm guessing that Wendell Berry and I even have different views on some of the details of Sabbath, and yet he gets the essence of deep rest, uh, ceasing from work, right, and delighting in the good things that God has given you. That's what Sabbath is really. Stop doing all the other stuff so you can enjoy grace, enjoy God, enjoy worship, enjoy what He's
Yep.
made. It's a,
Absolutely.
do you
You
have
gave
that
me
book?
that book as
Did
well.
I? Okay, of course you have it because I gave it to you.
So you asking about books made me think about a guy who was a mentor to me, Charlie Tremendous Jones,
Yeah,
and
tremendous.
his favorite saying was, "You'll be the same person 5 years from now that you are today, except for two things: the people you meet and the books you read." Which I think
Nice.
is a great saying, and it does. I was kind of amazed as I put together just a list of books, how many books have influenced me so significantly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really interesting. Okay, one more funny question, and then we'll move on to the real thing. I meant to ask this one earlier. We'll use it as our transition for some reason. If you had to pick the Disney Robin Hood, starring the animated Fox, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves with Kevin Costner and his crummy English accent, or Robin Hood Men in Tights, starring Carrie Elwes from The Princess Bride, did you have a preference of those three?
Oh man, I actually loved all three of those. So,
Okay.
and if I had to pick, if I was forced to pick, I would go with the Disney version.
Okay. Have you ever seen Errol Hood in the 1935 Robin
No.
Hood? It's been a long time since I've seen it. It was one of those that was like on TV, on Saturday afternoons as a kid. And I love that version. It may not hold up right if I watched it again today, but I love a good adventure story. Um, okay, I'm going to give one more book that'll transition us to our.
Hey, you didn't make a pick out of those three.
Oh no, you're right, I didn't. Um, I think I'm going to have to go with the Disney version too. The
Yeah.
Kevin Costner one, it's just the accent thing alone is almost enough to sink it, to be honest.
Yeah.
So
Even Morgan Freeman couldn't save that one, huh?
I know, and he was a interesting. Azim, was that his name in the movie?
I think so.
I think that's right. Okay, so one more book that has influenced me. It's recent. I just read it probably 3 or 4 years ago. Is The Road by Cormac McCarthy. Have you read this book?
Nope.
Okay, so it's a post-apocalyptic genre. The world is a disaster. You don't know why. And this is the story of a father and a son, in essence, traveling south through the wasteland that is now America, trying to get away from the cold and trying to survive. And it's not a Christian book at all. And yet this sense of desperation that the father has to love and care for his son is
Hmm.
deeply moving. And the book is really asking the question, like, what is the reason to live, right? Is there any reason to live? If the world is so miserable, which it really is in the book, it's awful. Why not just kill yourself, in a sense, is the question. And there's
Hmm.
this sort of unending desire for the father to care for his boy. And at one point, he says something like, um, the boy is God's word to me. And if the boy isn't God's word, God has never spoken. This idea of like that, yeah, I mean, you can do some father son stuff really interesting there, certainly. But even just the notion that despite the misery, and it's a bleak book, there's this light of, but God has spoken by sending this good thing into my life. And so we want to talk a little bit about apocalypse, eschatology, end things, the way that here we are locked down, right? That's why we're doing these Zoom calls.
Hmm.
We're in a pandemic, and people are thinking about mortality. They're thinking about, in some sense, the end of the world, the end of life as we know it. So we want to talk a little bit tonight about what the Bible has to say about that. What is eschatology, and what does it mean? Jordan, you want to give us the definition? Just give me the word eschatology. What's the word? Why do we use it?
Yeah, right. It's kind of the study of last things, right? So, looking towards the eschaton, what's coming at the end. And I think, everybody has an eschatology in one way or another. Yeah, I think you use that word immediately. It kind of maybe even disengages people, like, big scary word, but everyone has one.
Yeah, so it's a very religious word in some sense, and yet everyone's story has some sort of ending to it, right? I mean, you see it in superhero movies, right? They're all about, is the world going to end? And I didn't watch every Avenger movie, but a whole lot of that, the Infinity Stones, and is Thanos going to destroy everything?
Right.
It's sort of it's part of the human imagination at a minimum, that we all know there's a story and the story's going somewhere, and that there's an end, and that end could be good or bad. When we talk about eschatology, I think most people think of, well, let me ask you, when historically, if someone had said the word to you, eschatology, what's kind of the first thing you're thinking of?
Yeah, I mean, I typically just think of the book of Revelation and different views, and yeah, where's everything going, and
Yep.
what's the purpose in all of it, right?
Yeah. So, and that's right, of course. Good job, Jordan. Way to go. Yeah, so I think there are three things that the Bible means when we talk about eschatology. There's sort of three things in view. One thing that we typically think about the most, and I think this is particularly true of the American religious imagination, and there's a whole history behind why this is the case, right? But as you think about sort of this, the very end, the end of time, the end of history, the transition from the now to the not yet, and everything that means. And like you said, all the views, which we'll touch on briefly in a minute.
Hmm.
So that's one thing that the Bible does talk about. But the Bible actually talks about two other things that are, I would argue, just as important, if maybe not even more important. One is that there is an end, that the new heavens and new earth, there's an eternal state, right? So there's a destination we're heading to, and it's really good. And sickness and disease and death and sin and evil will be done away with. And we will experience life with God in a way that we never have before. And so, to your previous point, something like Peace Like a River helps us to imagine how good that could be. And yet, at the same time, I think the Bible pushes us to think about the fact that it's going to be even so much better than we can imagine, right? So, notions like this overwhelming eternal weight of glory that's coming,
Hmm.
or even the whole, right, that we're going to see, like right now we see as though veiled, and one day we'll see face to face. So there is this immense, amazing future that's coming, the Bible says, that shapes everything. And that's what we'll talk about later in our time tonight. But then there's the third category, and this is the really, really underrated, that's our theme, I guess, for the evening, underrated category, that the Bible, most of the time in the New Testament, talks about the last days. It's not talking about like the final 10 minutes, right? That actually the Bible more frequently talks, and it uses a couple different terms, talks about the last days are the period in between Jesus' first coming and his final coming.
Hmm.
And so, however exactly you understand the details of the final coming, which, as you know, I'm less interested in than many. Not that I don't care, but I just think a lot of our speculations are just that. They're speculations. We'll talk about that in a minute. But this idea that the last days are here, so to speak, I wanted to read Hebrews 1 is always a great example, right? So he says in Hebrews 1, in the past, God's spoken to our forefathers through the prophets, right? In all these other ways. But in these last days, he's spoken to us by his Son, who he has appointed the heir of all things, through whom he also created the world. So this idea that the last days already have happened. They're already here, right? That we're living in the last days. Another good reference, 1 Corinthians 10, also talking about the Old Testament. Now, these things happened to them as an example. So he's saying things happened in the Old Testament. They were written down for our instruction, New Testament church, on whom the end of the ages has come. So the last days aren't something coming down the road. The last days are here. They've already come on us because Jesus has come, right?
Right.
And Jesus is the king. And so the king has come. So the kingdom is at hand. And it's obviously not in its final form. And yet these last days are here. Now, interestingly, the Bible does, in a few cases in the New Testament, talk about the last day or the last hour, right? Paul and Jesus both talk about that. I've got, again, 1 Thessalonians 5, Paul talks about the day of the Lord. which is that transition point, right? From now to not yet. It's kind of what we think about as sort of the apocalyptic stuff, right?
Right.
There's going to be some kind of transition. And then Jesus talks about in Matthew 24:36 that no one knows the hour or the day, right? That's again talking about when is God going to wrap up human history and make some sort of transition into this new reality. So as you think about all of that, so you've got the end, the transition, and the last days that we're living in now. How do those three things relate to each other? Kind of graph them for us, if you will.
Sure. I think most of the time that we discuss these things, we're just thinking about the last hour, right? We are kind of become obsessed about talking about that exclusively. But certainly that matters. And the last hour, where this is all going, really matters. I mean, I think about the life in lockdown, right? To the extent that an end date is coming, to that extent, you can say, "Oh man, I can wait this out another week or 2 weeks, or even if it's 4 weeks." It helps you gauge your expectations.
Yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, in terms of just the last days, if there's a quality to these last days, and that's the descriptor, and we're in them, then yeah, all of a sudden, all of those sections that talk about the last days have a ton of application for now. So I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but thinking about Revelation, if that book was written only for the last hour, then it is only relevant to the people who lived during the last hour in some ways.
Yeah, right.
But it's really an epistle. I mean, you could argue that it's apocalyptic, it's prophecy, it's also an epistle. It's written to 7 different churches, and it's had relevance not only for them, but for the whole church for the last 2,000 years. So I didn't graph those at all. I'm sorry, but
it's quite all right.
I rambled.
Yeah, so that's a great point on Revelation, because again, and I think this is I said the American religious imagination has a particular interest in the last day, right? There's a whole host of reasons for that. One of them certainly is this first and second Great Awakening, and some of how that went down. Some of it also is the Scofield Reference Bible, right, in the late 1800s, that presented a particular view of the last day. And the reason that became so popular, in part, was because Scofield and people of his ilk were legitimately committed to the truthfulness of the Bible, right? And so they were fighting against a lot of the tendencies of that day, particularly to go squishy on the truth of the Bible, right? It's not really literally true. It's just ideas, useful ideas, interesting myths, etc. And so oftentimes Schaeffer so Scofield, Schaeffer, Dallas Theological Seminary, right? A lot of this stuff really legitimately championed the idea that the Bible is really true, that Jesus is really coming back. And yet, because of their commitment to the truth of the Word of God, many people sort of aligned their view of Revelation and the end time with, you believe the Bible's true. Those two things have to go together equally, right? And as you know, historically, the sort of particular premillennial view that was put forth in that Bible was not what the church has always believed, right? The church has believed a wide variety of things. I had a professor early on who said, prophecy is always a hindsight 2020 proposition. And so when there's something that hasn't happened yet, you got to be really careful giving too many specifics as terms that exactly how it's going to go down, right? Once it happens, once you know Jesus and you look back at the Old Testament, you go, oh yeah, that makes perfect sense. But if you're living in Micah's day or Hosea's day, you're not necessarily connecting all those things immediately to Jesus Christ of Nazareth. You don't know that stuff, right? So you've got to be careful with your view of the future because it hasn't happened yet. But we also, obviously, we take the Bible very seriously and want to legitimately say, yes, Jesus is coming back. It really matters. He's going to come back in bodily form. He's going to wrap everything up. Um, all that stuff, like your point, if you know where you're going, it's not all about the destination. The journey matters, right? And the journey matters how you travel on the
Yep.
destination. And it's really important. So why don't you tell me a little bit more, because I know there's a story here. Tell me a little bit more about your own initial interaction with these ideas and how it affected your own faith experience.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I was 11 years old when I first heard anything about an end of times view. Grew up Roman Catholic, and we went over to a neighbor's house when I was 11 years old, and they showed us this really cheesy 70s movie called A Thief in the Night. And it basically espouses what you were just describing as sort of a dispensational pre-mill view of, right. And we're talking about the millennium. We're talking about one chapter in the Bible that references 1,000-year period, and there's different interpretations on that. So this interpretation says Jesus is going to rapture the church, and all the believers are going to disappear, and then there's going to be this 7-year tribulation period, and then Jesus is going to come back again, and the believers are going to be on the earth at that point, and they're going to reign for 1,000 years, and yada yada.
Yep.
So the odd thing about that view is there's a lot of comings of Jesus, right? There's, he comes at the rapture, then there's a tribulation, then he comes again, and it's kind of creating an entire end of times view on, one chapter in the Bible, rather than sort of letting some of the other passages speak to it. Anyway, I derailed from my story. My story was that was the very thing that God used to grab my attention about the gospel. So, I think we can get, so caught up in the debates on, what does that one chapter mean, that we miss the fact that we all agree that Jesus is coming back and that there is going to be a judgment, right? And that judgment, that doctrine was what woke me up to the fact that I was under judgment, left to myself and my own record, rather than Jesus. And so that was the very thing that prompted me to go to my dad, who had become a Christian not long before, and ask him about the gospel, and God used that cheesy video to draw me to himself. So
Yeah. So, I mean, it's people sometimes rightly say, hey, you don't want to try to scare people into the kingdom, right?
right.
Yeah, I think that's true. As long as you don't miss the fact that God is righteous and holy in a way that we don't understand and can't imagine. And so it's right and good that he brings justice and judgment.
Absolutely.
And outside of the grace of God through Jesus, right? None of us deserve anything except righteous anger. And again, you don't necessarily have to have the dragons and the various other things. There are some legitimate different ways that Christians have understood those to be true passages, right? But to be speaking to slightly different details. And yet what you can't miss, to your point, is the gospel says God is righteous and good and holy and is going to ultimately judge the world because he's going to make it righteous and good and holy. And so there is a call to you, right, to respond.
Right.
You're not righteous and good and holy. And so how in the world are you going to stand before God in judgment unless you have the gospel, the righteousness of Jesus given to you? And so,
exactly
yeah,
right.
you're right. I mean, as a kid, I remember being really fearful, actually, of the end of time, right? It's a
Yeah.
terrifying thought. And even as I've, read and meditated on what's going on now, I mean, I don't think this is the end of human history, the coronavirus or anything. And yet people are understandably really spooked, right? Like, oh, I'm not sure life is going to go on like we thought it was. And what's it going to mean? And what if this thing is worse than we think? And there's a lot of legitimate questions there that are raised. And I think the goal of those things from a spiritual perspective, from God's perspective, the goal of those things, what is he doing with the coronavirus? Any number of things. We don't want to be overly specific, as I said last time, but certainly he wants to call our hearts to reckon with sin, future judgment, and to know that he's graciously offering grace to all those who follow him, right?
That's right. So, and just to kind of circle back really quickly on what you had said about the different views before, I think they're obviously in that pre-mill view, there's that desire to be literal with the Bible, and that's a good desire. But we also want to read the Bible according to the way it was written, with sensitivity to the genre, right?
Yes.
If we don't want to read Proverbs like they're prophecy, right? And we don't want to read
Right.
prophecy like it's literal, because a lot of times, sometimes it's using figurative language,
Sure.
apocalyptic language. And I think if you take Revelation as so literal, then you're always trying to, surmise the end of time, like different current day circumstances with, does that, line up with, and you've, and
Yes.
I've heard the abuses of this, of,
Sure.
the winged things in Revelation, and they're Apache helicopters, right? And so
Yep.
you're
Yep.
trying
Yep.
to constantly read your current circumstances into the prophetic language, when I think that the more worldwide view of the church, and one that seems to hold the most water, is this idea of an amil position, where we're in the last days, as you said. And if that's the case, then Revelation all of a sudden is very relevant to us. It's written
Yes.
to suffering Christians, Christians who are undergoing persecution, and it's amazing that God believed that, or knew that the thing that suffering Christians needed was a view of the end of times, and how Jesus was going to conquer. He has conquered, and he will conquer
Yeah.
completely.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's even right, making sense of the early church. How would they have read Revelation? And, one popular but unhelpful theory is like, well, they really thought Jesus was going to come back any minute, and then he didn't. So they had to like shift their views. When in reality, it seems to me and you that Revelation is written to say there's an end. God's righteous and he's going to bring justice. So as you experience injustice now, you don't have to utterly panic and give up.
Right.
That you can hang in there, that the end really matters, that there is an end coming, and that in fact you can suffer well. And so the word apocalypse, right? Even we take it to mean like cataclysmic ending, which is what it's come to mean over time. But the word itself simply means a revealing, right? An
Hmm.
unveiling. And so the apocalypse of John, which is the original title of Revelation, is that John is pulling back the curtain and basically saying there is a spiritual reality, there's a spiritual world, and it is a kind of warfare that's going on behind the scenes, and it will ultimately culminate in God's victory and will wrap up at the end of time, and there is a ending to the story
Yeah.
after that.
So I'm sure our listeners have already kind of heard some of the practical implications, but just speak to that a little bit longer. Just, why is this not just some egghead
Yeah.
theological discussion, and why is this actually really practical?
Yeah, it is really practical. So for a couple of reasons. I mean, one is, and some of this I'm allow myself to quote myself. I'm stealing from my Easter sermon because I've been thinking about this stuff. We're in a story, right? We're in God's story, in fact. And so the whole idea is that God is progressing his story. So see, think about the timeline, right? Creation and fall, or at the beginning, everything now is working to redeem what's fallen. Jesus is the center point of history. He's the main character of history because he's the redeemer, and history is about redemption. So he's taking this to a redeemed ending. And so if we're in a story, right, we all want to know the end of the story. Every book, every movie, every story, you wonder what the ending is going to be. Is it going to be a good story, a good ending, or a bad ending? So I think the ending really matters to a story. And we've all seen a few stories, right, that don't have much of an ending at all, and they leave you hanging, and it typically often is frustrating because you're like, well, I don't know what's going to happen. Like, did the good guy win or did the bad guy win? You didn't actually finish the story for me. And so I think it really matters because that story is our lived experience, that we're living in a story, and that if God's story is interacting with ours, he's actually taking it somewhere, and we want to know and trust in him and put our hope in the fact that he's going to win, that God wins, and that everyone who's connected to God will find the justice and righteousness that they're looking for. So that's the first major implication, is that sort of perseverance. I know where my story is going kind of thing. Uh,
Hmm.
Secondly, I think you mentioned this earlier, and I want to run with it for just a second. We live in a world without an eschatology, right? So the sort of whatever Judeo-Christian consensus doesn't exist anymore, right? And so we don't have sort of a meta narrative, if you will,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of everyone generally agrees with this basic story. Even if you don't believe it. Everyone knows this is the main story. Well, our stories have fractured, and so now what you see is the rise of dystopian literature, right? And this existed before because humans are always worried, what if the story ends badly? But when you think about it, I mean, again, I mentioned some of these in my Easter sermon: Walking Dead, 1984, Brave New World, Mad Max, right? Hunger Games, all this, The Road, the story I mentioned earlier by McCarthy. It's all this dystopia, post-apocalyptic. What's life going to be like? By the way, A Quiet Place with Jim Halpert, John Krasinski, is actually a really beautiful picture of how people, right, who love one another can live in a dystopian reality with like love and connection and family and hope. It's really. Have you seen that movie?
No.
A Quiet Place. It's a horror movie, but I mean, it's not really.
Okay. Yeah.
Anyways, trust me on that one. You'll like it.
Check it out.
So I think this dystopian thing actually reveals a couple things. One, it reveals that we're actually deeply insecure about our prospects, meaning despite all our progress, all the legitimately good things, right? Medical advances, technology advances, people coming out of poverty around the world, right? Really some amazing things in the last even 50, 25 years that have happened in world history. And here this pandemic comes along and all the experts, right, don't even know, is it mutating? Can we find a vaccine? What if we don't find a vaccine? All of our medical knowledge, not that it's not useful, of course it is. And yet it can't fully answer, how's this story going to end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you see this deep desire to know, is the story going to have a good ending or a bad ending? And this deep fear that despite all of our progress, what if our world can't hang together? What if we can't sort of keep going positively and progressing as a human race? I think that's what's behind a whole lot of the zombie stories, World War Z, right? What if something happens that causes everything to fall apart? And I think the answer to that is you're onto something. The ending of the story really matters. And only Jesus, by his power, by his resurrection, by the transformation, the ultimate final transformation that he's going to bring into the world, only through the Jesus story and the Jesus event do you have any chance of having the right final full outcome, because God will bring his power to bear on our world in a way that, as great as technology and medicine and politics and education, as great as those things are, I appreciate all of them. They don't seem quite to be able, right, to get us over the hump to utopia. So we fear dystopia. And in a sense, all of our desire for righteousness, justice, social justice, all of those things, only God has the power to be able to bring them to pass. And I think that's one of the hopes of eschatology is you can know there's going to be a good ending to the story.
Yeah, that's really good.
So let's think about this. Let's get super practical here, and then we'll hit some questions.
Yeah.
So the Bible, more than talking about, who the Antichrist is or some of those details, the Bible doesn't spend a lot of time on that stuff. It mentions a few of those, but it really talks a lot about how practically the fact that Jesus wins and comes back and fixes everything, that changes how we live now. What are some of the ways? Let's help our folks think about, how does the Bible say the future makes all the difference for now?
So I was reading an article in the Wall Street Journal last week about, it was asking the question, where does all of this generosity come from that we're seeing? Where are these kind of random acts of kindness? And it was trying to root it in an evolutionary, materialistic worldview. And the best explanation was that it comes from mothers' love for their children. And it was this big jump from there to, and therefore, the survival of the fittest, that somehow our species has figured out that's good. And I just thought, wow, that's the best we can do. And we know as Christians in our worldview that we've got lots of reasons for being generous, right? Because I mean, chief among them that Jesus gave himself for us. But I think eschatology helps us answer that question too. Why can I be so generous now with my resources? Why can I give my toilet paper away to somebody else? Because in the end, Jesus says that we're going to inherit the whole earth.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of inheritance is a huge motivator, should be, for Christians. Why don't I need to
Yes.
be jealous with somebody, my neighbor, who might have more than me, or what? Because Jesus tells me I'm going to inherit the whole earth. I can be generous with what I have because of the inheritance that's coming my way.
Yep.
And hold this earth a lot more loosely in the material possessions, etc. And I think the flip side of that is, from a material standpoint, is I should also actually value this earth, and value the things that I get to do, because, and this is where that earlier book by Leif Inger comes into play, right? The
Yeah.
idea that heaven is a real, tangible, touchable place, and you will feel more alive there and more in touch with your five senses than you ever have before. And
Yes.
so on one hand, as I garden, I could theoretically be preparing myself to do that activity in heaven, right? And this is where the imagination is helpful, but just that there will be a lot more continuity between this world and that than we tend to think.
Yeah,
And so,
that's huge, right? Because it's not the disembodied fat baby in a diaper playing a harp on a cloud scenario.
right.
The super tangible stuff at the end of Revelation says, hey, there's going to be it's going to be real, right? A city comes down out of heaven, new heavens and new
Mhm.
earth. It's all real. It's tangible. I mean, 1 Corinthians 15, new bodies, right? Everything's going to be made new. You're not going to be floating around, right? Like a happy ghost, but that actually you're going to have a new body, and that everything is going to be made new. The whole universe is remade. And it's a very real, thick, tangible hope of life in one sense as we know it, but without any of suffering, pain, evil, sickness, going on
Mhm.
forever with purpose and meaning and relationship. And I mean, it's really a much fuller, more compelling picture than just sort of this notion of like living in a cloud somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and the idea, even as you mentioned, suffering, that our suffering is somehow going to be um, shown to have worked for our good, right? That
Yes.
it will be eradicated, and yet the suffering that we're going through now is not meaningless.
Yeah.
It will probably in some way understand how it had purpose, and even as we meet Jesus, right? The two of
Mhm.
those ideas meeting together, and he's going to have the marks of
Yeah.
his crucifixion.
Yep.
The marks of suffering
Yeah.
are glorified in the
Yeah.
body of Jesus.
Yeah. 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 The idea that suffering isn't utterly meaningless is,
Hmm.
I think, really important. And the fact that it can somehow be redeemed, right? That even somehow what you've lost can be, in some sense, restored to you by Jesus, um, is very compelling, because we all have loss, right? We all have lost things, people, experiences that were really good. And we really puzzle over them. We really hurt over them. We wish those things weren't gone or over or broken. And Jesus, in a couple of places, promises to restore to us what we've lost or given up for his sake. One or two more. I had a couple real quick just to point people to. Titus 2 is a great one. For the grace of God has appeared, bringing salvation for all people. So it's happened. What's it doing? Training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives in the present age, waiting for our blessed hope, which is what? The appearing of the glory of our great God and Savior, right? So Jesus came, salvation came. He's at work now training us. What are we doing? We're waiting for what he's going to do. And our hope, this is one of those passages in the New Testament. Hope isn't, oh, well, I wish Jesus will fix stuff. It's this solid belief and confidence that Jesus is going to appear again, and that's actually our hope. Our hope isn't like, I don't know, I hope it gets better, but that Jesus is planning to come back, and that we'll see him. And when we see him, we'll know that he's going to wrap everything up and change it.
Yes.
Um,
And I think that's really good to just even leave us centered on Jesus, right? The chief part of our inheritance is the experience of God, the presence of God, and the delighting in Jesus.
yes.
Yeah.
He's our hope,
So
right?
these are hope.
Okay, so let's do this. Let's transition. It's 8 o'clock, so we know people probably are getting a little antsy sitting in the same place on Zoom for so long. Man, Zoom is helpful and hard to stomach for too long, right? All right, let me grab. Let's look at some of these questions for a second. Where can I get a sweet cross covenant mug? Do we have some more at the office? We probably do. We did at some
Probably.
point. I don't know. We'll have to track that down. Can we set up a cross park food exchange? Bread from Jeff, cake from Trish, veggies and beer from Tyre, etc. It's a nice idea. We'll have to think about that. Here's one from Dan Emmons. Jordan, are you currently on your tandem Peloton?
I have been on the Peloton today, and no, it is not tandem.
Oh man, that's great. Let's see. Which one of us, this is about the two of us, which one of you is most likely to win in a foot race?
Ooh, you've had pretty bad hamstrings, so I'm going to go with me.
Fair enough. Which one of you is most likely to dominate in a joust?
I'm going to go you.
Okay, I was going to go me too. Which one? These are all from Jenny Schmidt, by the way. Which one of you can recite poetry the best?
No, for sure you.
Yeah, I think that's probably true. Okay, Tyler Vandenberg says, also known as Stanton, are the deacons distributing toilet paper asking for a friend? Do you know the answer to that?
I don't, but I'm sure they would.
Okay, if you really need some toilet paper,
You really need it.
deacons@crossparkchurch.org. Larry Shank is asking, could we as pastors put together a recommended reading list? I think that's a great idea.
That is a great
I think
idea.
we'd be happy to combine some of our thoughts from tonight. Here's another one from the Ashworths. Jordan, how long did it take you to set up your camera for the sermon video so the map was perfectly centered on the frame and you in the middle?
Oh, that's a good question. Not too long, because in my editing process, I trim the sides. I crop it.
Ooh, wow.
So
Look at you.
The iPhone, you know.
You just blew my mind.
One of these days, you might see the light.
Yeah, maybe so. My family members have iPhones, but I don't. Okay, here's one more. Oh, Daryl Jones, intern emeritus. Did the last days begin when I ended my internship? If you don't know Daryl Jones,
we're waiting for your return.
Yes, exactly. Daryl left. The last days have begun. Now we just need him to come back at some point, and that would bring it full circle. One more question here, and I'm curious. This is an interesting question from Jake Ashworth. How is the presbytery responding to COVID-19? Is there anything Cross Park can do to help? My answer is, I don't know that we have any presbytery initiatives per se, but I know that several of our churches are involved in community stuff. So for example, if you haven't checked your email today, about 11:45 today, you got an email, Cross Park, with a video from Tyler Miller. We are partnering with Hope Community Church, one of our sister churches in the presbytery, taking food to families around South Charlotte. So I do know that several churches are involved. I don't know that there's any official presbytery effort, but we are partnering with some presbytery churches in that. Do you know anything else, Jordan, we should mention there?
Nope, that's exactly what I would have said.
Perfect. Okay, we have one last question, and then we're going to wrap it up. In your sermon from this last Sunday, you had a great quote. I think it was Thomas Brooks.
Yep.
He's an old Puritan fellow. And your question, the quote was, adversity has killed its thousands, prosperity its 10,000. So it's a clever riff, right, on the passage that you preached.
Yeah.
Saul and David, Saul's killed his thousands, David his 10,000s. So let's talk for just a second as we think about how the pandemic particularly has stripped away some of our prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
How does adversity kill the thousands, but prosperity 10,000s? What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's important to recognize that both of those can be destructive, right? So
yep, they both kill.
The question for the Christian is always, how do you respond to either one of them? You can respond really badly to adversity. You can also respond really badly to prosperity, but by the numbers, prosperity is way more likely to make you lethargic, dull your senses, make you think that there is no, end coming, right? Neither death nor something after it, nor a judgment. So adversity, I think, does have the ability to wake us up, sort of like smelling salts, to see, wow, pay attention, because there's bigger problems than even these surface level ones, right? I mean, you think about Jesus when he heals the paralytic who's lowered through the ceiling.
Mm-hmm.
The first thing he tells him is, "Your sins are forgiven."
Yeah.
He looks at his faith, and I'm like, I'm sure he's like, "Well, I came here for my legs to be healed, right?"
Yeah.
But the legs point to the sin problem. But it seems like people who go through adversity have a lot more likelihood to be aware of a deeper need than those who go through prosperity. And so I think that's the essence of the quote, is that prosperity dulls the senses. And it kind of points back to Jesus's quote of we'll it's more likely for a rich man to enter the kingdom, or more likely for the camel to go through the eye of a needle than a rich man to go through the kingdom, right? And
yeah. I think you're right. I mean, so yeah, I mean, if you look at, just think about the quote in what it says, right? They both kill. Adversity is really challenging. I was listening to a sermon this morning, Tim Keller, on my morning walk, and he's pointing out that typically adversity, right, either pushes you towards God or away from God. I think we all know that's a common experience. It rarely leaves you neutral. But prosperity actually in some ways can leave you almost neutral, right? It can leave you, like you said, sort of sidelined. Everything's easy and smooth. Maybe maybe I say I'm a Christian, maybe I believe, but I'm not really being pushed at all. So adversity has this ability sometimes to clarify. I was telling someone recently that, when I lived overseas, I had several pastors in Asia say, I actually think it might be harder to be a Christian in America. And I thought, well, hey, man, you guys are being persecuted. I think it's harder to be a Christian here. And they said, actually, you have so many things in America that a lot of people just don't feel like, why do I need a savior? I'm doing fine, right? I have all my needs met, a lot of my wants met. And so adversity has this ability to clarify. And actually, again, in the definition, the dictionary definition of apocalypse is unveiling or revealing. And so it doesn't have to mean the end of all things. But I think what this pandemic is doing for many of us is revealing and unveiling what's in our hearts, how much we trust in the stuff around us, how we all naturally we trust in our identity from our work, from how other people think about us, from how much money we make, from whatever we have. And a lot of that stuff is being revealed to be maybe not as important as we thought it was. And so adversity has an ability to clarify, where prosperity oftentimes leaves you sort of in the stupor, right? Of, I'm fine. Everything's going pretty good. I'll get to it later. There's no urgency typically,
right,
in prosperity. I actually found a great quote from the contemplative pastor today on this. He says, under the urgency of an imminent end, reality is revealed suddenly for what it is. We had supposed our lives were so utterly ordinary. Sin habits dull our faith into stodgy moralism and respectable boredom. Then crisis rips off the veneer of cliche from the everyday routines and reveals the side-by-side splendors and terrors of heaven and hell. Apocalypse is arson. It secretly sets a fire in the imagination that boils the fat out of an obese culture religion and renders a clear gospel love, a pure gospel hope, a purged gospel faith. It's a great quote. Maybe I'll send it out so people can see it again. It's a lot in there. But the idea that, right, when you see things as they really are, when adversity comes, it boils the fat out of what's accumulated over time and shows us what really matters.
Right.
It reminds us that the gospel is actually our only hope.
Fantastic.
So let's end on that note. Again, if you listen tonight, you can click below. You can click subscribe and follow our page right below. Keep watching. We'll be sending out updates. We're going to have another update I think we're going to have a ruling elder and a deacon send out an update later this week. We're continuing to, as you noticed, work on our Sunday morning online experience. It's not the same as meeting together, but we're trying to make it as useful as we can to you, both so you can participate in it, but also so you can send it to friends and neighbors who might really enjoy it. Maybe they're really wrestling with questions that are coming up during this time. So we want you to be able to send that easily to people, and they can follow along very simply, hear the message, and really reflect on the gospel. So, Jordan, I'm going to guess we're going to do this again if the lockdown keeps going. We haven't made any plans to that end, but thanks for joining me tonight.
Yep.
Everybody out there, thanks for joining us. We wish we could see you in person sometime soon, but we're going to continue to wait with urgency and patience, waiting on the Lord, as we always are, waiting on what he's going to do. And we look forward to getting together whenever we can. But keep an eye out for another one of these coming in the next week or two if we are still under the lockdown. All right, man. Thanks for joining us. All right, everyone. Thanks. We're going to end this and we'll see you soon. Take care. Bye.